Hello everyone, I'm Andy Trotter, I'm the chair of Oxleas, and welcome to the latest issue of Oxwide, where today we're looking back at a year of COVID, a momentous year for everyone. But let's find out what the current situation is from our medical director, Dr. Ify Okocha. Ify, please.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everyone. This situation is really quite positive, actually. So as of this morning, we have no patients with COVID on any of our wards, be it mental health or intermediate care, which is really good. We have a handful of our staff who are still isolating. And just to remind everyone, vaccinations are still ongoing. We have lots of spaces for next Wednesday for the first COVID vaccine. And then the following week, we'll start our second vaccination program. So if you haven't already been vaccinated, then do please do your absolute best to get in next week before we go into the second vaccination program. Back to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Ify. That's a much more positive picture, isn't it? And some really good news there. Earlier this week, we marked a minute's silence to remember all those people who died during this dreadful pandemic. And if you look back over this year, we're also talking to people who took part in broadcasts earlier in the year for Oxwide. So it'd be a really good chance now to have an update from them as to how things have gone and to reflect upon that year. So welcome to our guests today. We've got Dr. Rachel DALY, Dr. BIANCA IGNA, Jane Wells, Sarah Hadley and Karen Edmunds. It's been a really challenging year and people have had to make many changes and adapt how they're working. But starting with you, Sarah, how has it been for you and your teams?
Well, Andy, I can't say it hasn't been a challenging year. The team have responded really well to adapted psychotherapeutic practice working online. We've had lots of wins and we've found that there's practice that we will want to lock in for the future. For example, our parent consultations have worked really well online. Things like video letters to our young people and young adults with severe learning disabilities have been an important way of reaching out when we've not been able to be face-to-face. What we've learned with online working is that we can have more client-centered care where music therapy can follow the client where they are. So, for example, if some of our very vulnerable children are hospitalized, we can continue to work with them in a way that is continuing to be impactful. This is something we didn't do before because we weren't allowed to go into hospitals to work with our children and young people who have quite complex medical needs. I have to say, during this period, what has happened is the quality of our relationships with our community partners has just blossomed. It's always been good, but they have been so engaged with making music therapy happen within the community. And this runs from children's centres to adult day centres and all things in between, the special schools, our mainstream primary and secondaries. It's been awesome. Now we are back to face-to-face practice at about 95%. We still have a little online practice, particularly with our clinically extremely vulnerable clients. We are also mindful of the fact that we didn't want families who needed to use public transport to come into clinic to be exposed. So we were kind of got that focus in having a menu of what people felt most comfortable with. So it's been great coming back to face-to-face work. And Andy, I have to say, one of the outcomes and impacts of COVID, which is not so forefront in the national news, is the impact of mental health on our children and families. And we've been doing a lot of parental generic support in terms of bridging between home and school, of the parent in the dual role of parent teacher. And again, there's been huge stress on families, and this is just coming to light even more so as we get to be seeing our families face to face. And I think we do have massive post-COVID challenges in working with the mental health needs of our children, families, and support networks going forward. And of course, in the early years, we have all the COVID impact of those babies that have not been exposed to usual stimulus that they would have in the community, the development of secondary attachment figures when they go to meet their wider family, which we know is key to their resilience going forward. So, Andy, we have big challenges ahead. Fortunately, we work with the most amazing trust who is up for innovative practice and for spreading the scope, the reach of music therapy. So we're well positioned to look to the future challenges. So that's a brief update from the music therapy service.
Oh, that was really good, Sarah. Thank you. I mean, as you rightly point out, so many challenges to come from this experience, but it certainly sounds as if there may be some things we've learned from this experience as well about the way we operate and things we might take into the future as well. But just want a huge thank you to you and your team for working so hard during this time. And you rightly point out all of the issues we've got to come as well. So, but thank you. Super update. Thank you. Bianca, would you be able to come in and give us an update now, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Andy. I don't think it's news to anyone that this year has been tremendously challenging, and has been challenging for us, for the staff, and not at least for our patients. So reflecting on it, just trying to ponder over the last year, I think we all try to take the good old advice of taking one day at a time and moving forward with hope, because there is no doubt hope. We've heard about the vaccination program, we've heard about the current cases in the trust and the fantastic management. And I think what we've learned as a team, maybe all of us, not feeling guilty probably from working from home more than 2 hours, which for an inpatient team was probably something that none of us entertained a year ago, in a face-to-face contact with our patients, and also for our patients to adapt to these changes of seeing some of us on screens. And for some of them, this has been quite a difficult and quite a new step in their pathway within the mental health services. Being grateful for little things none of us were able to appreciate before. I think that has been quite a good reflection for all and the team, and developing a quality of the relationship. I heard Sarah speaking about it with our colleagues and with our associations, like for example with the medical colleagues in an event of an outbreak on the ward, with our general hospital, the colleagues from the general hospitals, developing good and joint working protocols. I think this has been quite crucial, and this is something that maybe has brought all of us together, and managing all together the mental health and the physical health in a disease that none of us knew how to approach, and none of us knew what challenges is going to bring. And I think this was absolutely a crucial development. We've all learned to work with each other. We'll learn how to work with our strengths and weaknesses in terms of mental health and physical health from both sides. And amazingly grateful not only for my team and the staff, but for our patients with a lot of resilience, put up with the lockdown and restrictions in the lockdown. And we all know within the mental health services, leave being outside of the unit is extremely important, and it makes a big part of the recovery. And that being stopped, and for all of us having to look into more inwardly and ward-based activities, what can we do? That has been the challenge, and amazingly grateful for the team and how this has come together to move forward, and to move forward with hope. And I'm truly hopeful, again using this word quite a few times, that we can all come out of this together and united and stronger nonetheless.
Oh, thank you, Bianca. It's really interesting, isn't it, how both of you so far have mentioned partnership with outside agencies, and that has brought us together. And it's really interesting how this crisis has made us perhaps drop some of the barriers we might have had in the past to challenge working practices, and little things that have got in the way that we wouldn't have done 18 months ago that we're now doing now. And I suppose it's trying to capture the good things, isn't it? That we can grab hold of those whilst trying to get back to some sort of normality at the same time. And particularly taking your point about outside visits and things like that, and visits too, it must have been so difficult for people, and we can't wait, can we, for the vaccination program to kick in everywhere and to get back to something like normality. And talking vaccines, thank you so much, Bianca. It's absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Jane, talking vaccination program, and anything else that you want to update us on, please, Jane?
Oh, thank you. I'd just like to say a really, really big thank you to everybody who's come forward to support the vaccination programme, all our staff who've taken their first doses, and some of them are starting to have their second doses now, to all our vaccinators who've given up so much of their time to make sure that we were able to run the programme and continue to do so, and to everybody who's supported our inpatients who've needed vaccinations to make sure that we've managed to support them and we will get their second doses into them. I'm really pleased to say that after we did the one-to-one conversations last week, we've managed to add an awful lot of staff to ESR, which is the employment system for recording staff information on vaccinations. It looks like we're over 70% vaccinated now, which is really good. And there's a really good uptake within our BAME community of staff as well, which is excellent news. So we've had the two vaccines. Some of our staff have had the Pfizer vaccine, which a big shout out and thank you to our primary care colleagues and partners who shared their doses with some of our early staff that needed them. And we've had well over 3,000 staff vaccinated with AstraZeneca as well. We start our doses of the second dose on the 7th of April, and everybody has their appointments for those. And we're doing a one-off clinic next Wednesday for anybody who still wants it. We've got plenty of bookings, and an email went out yesterday. But I think what I'd really like to say is, whilst it's great news that people are having the vaccination, and it's great that, you know, a large proportion of the country will be vaccinated, there is still not herd immunity, and we still need to be very, very cautious. We need to anticipate any resurgences, and we need to be aware that there's several hundred variants circulating at the moment. So the vaccine is not the be all and end all. We must remember hands, face, space. And I wouldn't have got to a year on in terms of our pandemic if I couldn't get hands, face, space into what I say. And with that, I'd like to just really reinforce how difficult it's been for people to get their head round the infection prevention and control, forever changing guidance, including myself. And a big thank you for everybody who's really worked hard to make sure that compliance is achieved. What I've witnessed over the last year is truly compassionate leadership at all levels. I've seen people going through a roller coaster of physical and emotional challenges, and I've seen people hold each other and support each other at the most difficult times and in the most unexpected ways. So to me, the vaccine is, the cherry on the cake at this moment, giving people hope. But it's that ongoingness together, that's continuing to support each other and making sure that we get through the next months and years to come as we learn to live with COVID. But big thank you, all our staff, community staff managing the increasing caseloads, particularly in district nursing, for example, with the increased end of life care. And we're hearing more about long COVID, which is being managed very much by our long-term condition teams, particularly our heart failure and our respiratory teams and our rehabilitation teams. We're seeing an awful lot more safeguarding, an awful lot more domestic abuse, and we're seeing the surge in the impact on mental health, both for young people and people who've not been known to our services before. So as people like Sarah have highlighted before, we're on a journey here. This is going to change the way and transform the way that we do our work. And I'm just really grateful that we work with such great people who are going to be able to make this happen for everybody in our communities. It's a privilege to work with you all, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jane, and thank you so much for your leadership throughout this. I thought the vaccination programme has been absolutely outstanding and brilliantly done. And echoing your comments about the workload, I mean, it's not only carrying on, it's been the additional work as well, hasn't it? Our district nurses, our community mental health nurses, home treatment teams. Well, there are so many to mention, but I particularly noticed how much that work was shifted down, often from primary care, landing on our frontline staff in the most difficult circumstances as well. And I really do think it's been an absolutely outstanding effort from everyone. And I do want to particularly congratulate you, Jane, for your leadership throughout this. I think it's shone through, and thank you so much for everything that you have done on that. Rachel Daly, please.
Good morning to everyone. And it's been wonderful listening to everyone, because I think it's making me feel optimistic. And I suppose prisons, we look after the marginalised parts of society, and sadly, offending didn't stop in the pandemic, but we had different sort of challenges. Thanking you, and I'm probably starting back to front, but I wanted to thank the trust. People like IFE and intensive care, so many people took people on civil sections that judges sent to prison for a few days and were ill, which might have been accommodated by my colleagues in other ways in the past. So a big thank you to the trust for putting up with endless calls from me. And I think, like Bianca's reflected, we've worked so much closer with GPs and prison staff to survive. So I think when I spoke last May, healthcare was shut down. We had lots of challenges, particularly at Belmarsh, but things are looking better for the prison. I think today in Belmarsh, we don't have any prisoner positive. Staff who've been shielding are managing to come back in April. So it's quite positive that we're getting our team back to work. And I think also at ICE and Thames side, there has been a little bit of change in the way we're working. And I suppose some positive things. We've had a busy year. Healthcare is now a little bit more normal, less shielding in it. We're getting back more operationally in the prison. And for these prisoners who've been locked in, it's a bit of a relief for us to getting more time out of cell. But the big thing that we've got to work through with the prison service and the courts locally is the delay in trials. And when you waited for a year in the past, you'll now be waiting 3 years. So I've been doing a lot of work with our judges and the team here to try and keep the morale up, because we're going to look after prisoners for a longer length of time on remand here, and it's challenges. The team's been working tremendously well. I want to say thank you to people like our transfer coordinator, who's transferred 100 sick mentally disordered offenders out to hospital in the last year. That's Kevin. Wonderful piece of work. Thank you to governors and prison officers who've called me when they've picked up that sick prisoner, just minor little things. We've all worked much closer. And I think our nurses across the cluster have become very upskilled, working with prison officers with distraction packs, because we couldn't run groups, we couldn't get prisoners out. So I think there's been a change in the way we work, but it's been positive. People have developed new skills. And I've particularly learned to work with so many more people in different ways. And I have to say a big thank you to the GPs who've sort of really supported me in difficult times. So I think it's been a challenge for prison. I thought we'd have a riot. So, well, thanks, we haven't had a riot. Thank you to the prisoners, but thank you to colleagues across the board, because they've kept me going. And I'm hoping, I was a woman for projects and service development. I've had to stop the projects and just be a survivor. And that's how it feels that we're coming out the other end. But I do want to thank the trust, because I feel I've had amazing support. Ify, thank you for that late night call on a Friday from Thames side. So a big thank you, but we are getting there, but it's the delay in courts are now going to be our next challenge for prisoners.
Thank you, Ray. Well, thank you to you and your teams. I mean, I must admit, when I look at the remand dates now, I follow a few barristers on social media, and you start talking about 22 and even to 23 for some court dates, and you think this is extraordinary, isn't it? And the pressures that's going to put on everybody, it's clearly not right. I don't think there's clearly a lot more to be done here to be keeping people in custody for that length of time, and particularly keeping them locked up. I endorse your thoughts, Rachel. I'm amazed we haven't had more trouble, really. I thought there would be real problems.
I think we're getting back to normal, because the alarm's gone off more often in prison this week than it's done in a whole year. People are running again. So I was a bit shocked. But just to come back to you, Andy, on this remand period, I had, when you're doing liaising with courts all day long, like I am with the Old Bailey and Woolwich Crown, and the judges, we sort of had a meeting and said, how are we all going to work together? And we've survived. Interestingly, I had a call this week from a barrister saying, look, this chap's going to wait another year for a murder trial, and he's a man who's got PTSD from the incident. how well is he going to recollect? So I had to go back out to the house block, and having talked through this several times, this prisoner is not going to be good giving evidence because we've managed the PTSD and we're on to the next stage. And it is interesting what it's going to be like for barristers when people have had to wait so long to get back in and relive it. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, and society has to be managed, but it is a challenge for us as psychiatrists, because I know people won't recollect as well 3 years later. Because even when I have, you know, an SUI and someone says that happened 5 years ago, you don't remember it as well as in the recent days or weeks. So I think we will see a knock-on effect with the courts. And I mean, I think the judges were already under huge pressure like the NHS going into COVID. So there's a ripple effect. But I think it is they are very supportive, and I think we've worked very well to try and run the trials. And the judges say, please help me keep my trial running, and that's what we've tried to do. But we've had to work differently. Like, see that prisoner when they come off the van in the evening, who've had a bad day in court, to try and give them that support when we know they're fit to plead but are anxious. Little things, we're working differently. But I think we're getting there, and I think it is a big drain on the staff. And of course, prisons are never exciting, and we have, I suppose, a bit of lower morale. It's more difficult to keep staff now coming out of COVID.
Yes, I'd imagine it's going to be quite a tough time for everybody.
But
thank you so much, Rachel, for everything that you and your staff have done through these really, really difficult times. Karen, can I come to you now to tell us how it's been for you and your team?
Thanks, Andy. Yes, I think reflecting back on the year, I'm going to talk about staff that have had to shield, but I also want to mention, because of my role in inequalities, is the huge impact that COVID's had, particularly on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, and that includes our staff. And we've done a lot to try and support staff through having regular online wellbeing sessions, for example, where people can raise anything that they have any worries about and get answers to their questions. And I think that's been really important. And we've had some really wonderful support from senior managers across Oxleas who are themselves Black, Asian and minority ethnic to facilitate those sessions. So I really wanted to mention that. And the fact that COVID has shone a light on some of the massive health inequalities that we've got to deal with, and we will have to really focus on, I think, as we move forward over the next few years. We can't ignore them anymore, and I think some of them have been ignored for too long. In terms of staff that have shielded and how we've tried to support those, we've had about 140 staff who over the last year have had to shield for quite long chunks of time. And for people that don't know, it's not just about self-isolating for 2 weeks. We're talking about people who have basically had no contact with anyone outside their household for a year or their support bubble. So if you live alone, you've been allowed, like myself, I've got a support bubble, my best friend and her family, but actually you haven't seen anyone else. You haven't gone to the supermarket, you haven't gone out anywhere, because that was the advice, to stay at home and keep safe. And it will remain the advice after the 1st of April in terms of trying to work from home if you can. But we know we've got staff that can't do their jobs from home, who've been at home unable to do their normal role, or have had to do a very adjusted role. They're now facing the prospect of coming back from next Thursday. We're looking at how we can support people to do that in a really understanding way, and really appreciate that it's going to be a massive change for people. If you've really seen no one for nearly a year, to then come into an environment where you've got colleagues, patients, other people around, it's making some people feel quite nervous. So I think to ask for a bit of understanding about that, and also revisiting the risk assessment as well for each of those members of staff, to make sure we do everything we can to keep people as safe as possible. Because although shielding is being suspended from the 1st of April, we know there is still infection out there in the community. And a third of people don't even have symptoms when they've got it. So we need to be carrying on, as Jane said, the whole sort of hands, face and space. And that includes in offices and in ward environments as well. Just be mindful that we'll have colleagues coming back that have had to shield. And the reason they've shielded is because they're deemed to be clinically extremely vulnerable, which means if they get COVID, they're very, very likely to get seriously ill or die. So it's really important we don't forget that and that we don't take it lightly. So, but we've had regular online sessions for those staff that have been shielding, regular newsletters. We've had really positive feedback about the support that Oxleas has given to shielding staff, including people's line managers. A lot of people have said to me how their line manager has been fantastic, and that's been key to making their experience as positive as it can be in the circumstances. So I thank you to all those supportive managers out there that have done that.
Thanks very much indeed, Karen. Thank you. Can I come to you, Ife, now, please, to give us thoughts on anything really as our medical director reflecting back on the year?
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, colleagues. It's really been quite interesting listening to the different perspectives. And like you've all said, it's been a year that I don't think we'll ever forget, but I hope that we will not see a year like this again. Karen has talked about how COVID highlighted the inequalities, both of care, but certainly the inequalities in our society. We do, of course, know that when it became evident that Black, Asian, and minority ethnic groups were disproportionately affected, we began to do something in the trust. And I'm really very pleased that that work has now galvanized us, not just to look at BAME groups, but to look at diversity and inclusion in this organization. And so the work we're doing now under the banner of Building a Fairer Oxleas is really about how do we celebrate the diversity of our staff, how do we ensure that our staff are included in everything we do. And for me, as someone who has been chairing the group, it's just been fantastic. You know, quite a lot of great things have come out so far, and I look forward to many more things. You know, you will, of course, know that in spite of the pandemic, you know, many of our colleagues, actually, led by Rachel Clare, did fantastic work in looking at our values. We now have new values. You know, we are kind, we're fair, we listen, we care. We have behaviors that we've agreed should underpin those values. The Building a Fairer Oxleas work has emphasized the need for us to make our recruitment and career progression fairer. We're doing something about that. It's also emphasized the need for us to build cultural competence within the organization. So there are all sorts of cultural competency programs that we're running for managers. Of course, I was delighted that the board had a whole day session, which was really quite insightful for many of us. A number of other things that have been built, you know, micro incivilities and microaggression videos, which I think speaks to some of those things that chip away at some of our staff that we really need to curtail in the organization. Karen has also talked about some of the well-being sessions, specifically for BME groups, but we also have well-being sessions that are being organized for the broader staff groups. And across the ICS, we're looking at creating a well-being hub for our staff, because I think that our staff are going to need every help that they can get to face up to the challenges that are likely to come our way. So it's kind of been an interesting year with lots and lots of challenges. We've been resilient and we've pulled together to manage to get through. But I think that we really need to learn from many of the things we did over the last year and hold on to those things to propel us forward over the next 2 or so years as we see how this whole COVID thing unfolds. But it's great to know that the vaccines are working. And again, to emphasize Jane's point, please, if you haven't been vaccinated, do go ahead, because we need that armory to be able to overcome this and to have a much brighter future. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Ife. Again, thank you for your leadership, and particularly the way that you're leading the approach on that on mental health, patient flow, and the real pressures that we know we've got in that particular area, part of our organisation at the moment. So again, thank you for your leadership throughout this incredibly challenging time. Well, I thought that was really fascinating. I really enjoyed listening to, you know, different parts of our organisation, what's been happening with you and how you're dealing with it. how we're looking to the future as well. And thank you to all of the participants today. Thank you for those of you watching, but a biggest thank you to our staff, whether that be our staff out there on the front line, the staff that are working from home, the staff in the back office that just get on and make the system work. I've been so impressed. I've been so enormously impressed by the dedication, the professionalism, the sheer hard work and the compassion that has shone through from our Oxleas team. So I just want to thank you all one more time for everything you've done during this incredibly difficult time. Thank you very much and goodbye.